Go ahead and pause it and draw this diagram. Notice at the end of each line I have an arrow. And by each letter there's actually a point drawn. There doesn't have to be, but I do have a point there for them. If you are going to name an object, if you wanted to name this point right here, you would use a capital M, a capital Q, a capital X, a capital P, a capital N. Any of those are all points. Oops, I should be writing this in black. M, N, Q, X, and P are all points. H is not a point. H is not a point because it's lowercase letter. V is not a point. It could be, except for it's like cursive writing, it's italicized. That we're going to use to talk about the plane. But it's not a point because it's not just a big straight up capital letter. What you do not do, we'll put a little do not do. Do not call it point M. We know that it's a point because it has a single letter. Anything in the rest of the year for geometry that has a single capital letter, we already know it's a point. So don't call it point M. When you see a capital M in English, mathematically, you would say point M. You don't want to say point M. All right, moving on. The plane. If you're talking about the plane, as I said before, you need 3 points. Any 3 points can make a plane. So for a plane, you're always going to use 3 points. Any 3 points on that plane. They have to be points, M, N, Q, X, or P. It can't be H or V. And you're going to pick P, X, N might be a plane. P, X, and N, you could name the plane. You could name it M, Q, and P if you want to. But those 3 points that we're talking about, this gets tricky, but follow along with me here. Those 3 points that we're talking about have to be non-collinear. They cannot be in a straight line. If you are naming a plane, you can't pick 3 points that are in a line. For example, you cannot pick M, X, and N. That isn't good enough for showing me that that's a plane. Why isn't it? Because if those were my 3 points, I can put that plane through at any angle that I want. I can put it flat to the board. I can put it straight out from the board. I could put it at an angle like this from the board. I could put that plane through an angle like this. I have no idea where you want me to put that plane. So if you pick 2 points on that line, and then a 3rd point somewhere else, that now tells me I have to lay my plane flat to get from M to N to Q. So it gets tricky. You need 3 points to name a plane. I should put a comma between those. But those 3 points have to be non-collinear. They cannot be in a perfect line because that's not good enough in naming your plane. That might be something you want to ask me about or talk to me about when you can see me a little bit more face to face. One more way of naming a plane, we have this little V in the corner. You are allowed to name it if there is an italicized letter in the corner. You can call it plane V. And the reason why I wrote plane in front of it is because otherwise you're going to think it's a point if it's just a capital letter. So plane, use 3 points that are not collinear, or name it by its corner plane. 2 options. All right, moving on to the line. This line has 3 points on it. False. This line has an infinite amount of points on it. It has so many points on it that you can't label them all. there are 3 points that are showing. Well, to be a line, you only get to pick 2 of those points, and you put a line symbol over the top of it. That says line PX. Line PX goes from P through X, because a line extends without end in 2 directions. That's actually going through Q also. The arrow shows that it's going to go through Q eventually anyway, so we call it line PX. We could call it line XP. We could call it line XQ. We could call it line QX. And it has 2 more names for it. You could also call it line PQ. And you could call it line QP. Any combination of 2 of the letters. You can only use 2 of the letters. Any combination of 2 points with a line symbol over it makes a line. That's 6 names just for that red line. This line will have 6 other names. If you had another point on it, it would have 8 names. What can't you do for a line? You absolutely cannot, as you can see, this is my universal symbol for cannot. You cannot call it line PXQ. Illegal, wrong, against the rules. You will get it marked wrong today, tomorrow, next assessment, and the rest of your career in math if you use 3 points for a line. We need 3 points for a plane. We only need 2 points for a line. So don't do that. All right, finishing up with segment and ray, you're going to find out that they're closely related, but there still is a difference on those. A segment, you have to pick the 2 endpoints. If you remember back to the word segment, it says it has 2 endpoints. So when you're naming this, you have to use the 2 endpoints. If you're talking about segment MX, and you put a segment bar over the top, no arrows, just a segment bar over the top, that means you're starting at M and going to X. It's only that little piece of your line. You could also call that segment XM, because it doesn't matter. If you draw from X to M or M to X, it's the same piece. It's the same little part of the line. So segments, 2 points, segment bar over the top. If you wanted to talk about segment MN, you would have to start at M, finish through N, or backwards from N to M. What can't you do? Hopefully you're catching on to this. What can't you do? You cannot call it segment M, X, N. That is not okay. Segment MX is one, XN is another, MX is a third. You do not use 3 points to determine a segment. You only want the 2 endpoints. Where did it start? Where did it end? All right, and finally let's finish up with the ray. The ray has a uniqueness to it, in that a ray has an initial point. If you go back and look at your vocab quick, a ray has, I'm going to scroll, 1 endpoint called an initial point. So when you are naming this ray, you have to start with its endpoint. I'm going to work with P. Ray P. I don't know. What do I want to call it? Do I want to call it ray PX? Or do I want to call it ray PQ? I'm going to put a ray symbol over it, which is an arrow going to the right, always this direction. You can call it ray PX or ray PQ, because both of them, the initial point is at P. It's going to go through X, but the arrow tells me, nope, it's going to keep going, which means it eventually goes through Q anyway. So if you named that purple ray, it's named ray px or ray pq. Not the same as the reverse direction. Okay, a different ray would be if you called it ray qx. Ray qx or ray qp. If somebody who knows their geometry and understands vocabulary and notation saw these two writings on here, I'm going to separate them, and you probably should too. These are two different rays. If you were told in the instructions, draw ray px, I'm going to draw ray px, nice and big for you. I'll use a purple highlighter. I'm going to draw ray px. There's my ray. If I was told to draw ray px or ray pq, that's what I would draw. However, if you read the directions and you were told to draw ray qx, that means that you would start your ray on Q and go the opposite direction. Completely not the same. I mean, think of that, how important rays would be if you were talking direction. If you said, oh yeah, you just drive from Q to P. Well, I meant P to Q, but it's the same difference. No, it's not. You're going the exact opposite way. Start with the initial point, draw it that way. And one more time, what can't you do when talking about rays? You cannot call that ray PXQ. We don't use 3 points for a ray. You only use 2 points for a ray. And the other thing you can't do, is you can't call it ray PX and say, well no, P is my initial point and it's going through X, so I'm going to draw it this way. That's not okay. We don't draw arrows going from right to left. We draw our arrows going from left to right. So it's against the rules in vocabulary, in geometry, in notation to use 3 points on a ray or to draw the ray in the reverse backwards direction. All right, we're on our last section and it's just interpreting